So, welcome, Chris. Thank you so much for giving up some of your Liberation Day to
Absolutely.
have this interview with us. Thank you. Um, my name's Maggie McGeary from AIPMO Book Review team, and we have with us also Ritu Chandna, who's our senior editor at AIPMO. And I'm really delighted to have you, Chris Lukassen, on our author interview this session. We've reviewed two of your books so far on the book review team, and the team have really enjoyed and loved the not just the content of the book, but the creativity with which you've approached them, and the kind of innovation and novelty in the approach to the book. So I have your Product Samurai one here. Oh, it's not coming up on the screen, but it's a very friendly front cover with
See if this one, it
yeah,
goes over that one.
that's it, that's better. With the little cartoon, so it really jumps off the shelf, and I certainly really enjoyed reading it myself as well, Chris. So I'm curious how you got started. First of all, how you got started in product management, and then secondly, at what point that became an urge to put your learnings into the Product Samurai. I think was the first one, wasn't it? So can you tell
Yeah,
us more?
thanks for having me. And as you said, it's Liberation Day, and in terms of PMO and project management, that was sort of the biggest operation and biggest project we've seen in the Netherlands at all times. So it is a fitting metaphor to talk about product management, goals, vision, and at the same time also the chaos of real life managing stuff and work. So your first question was really about product management and how I came into that. And yeah, so product management, I have a background in engineering. So I was an engineer. I built radar systems and operating systems, so real low-level software. But as an engineer, you always wonder, why am I building this? What's the reasoning behind it? And people told me, well, shouldn't worry too much about that. The architect takes care of that. And I was like, well, then I'll become an architect. And then as an architect, I asked, hey, so why are we building this? And they said, no, the project manager knows. And I became a project manager. And I sort of went through many ranks. But when I landed in products, I think that was the first time that I really started to get answers. And I started this journey figuring out what is it that customers really want. And typically it's not what they ask for. It's typically not what we signed up for or what we're actually doing. But there's some magic if you really touch that pain point. And I was talking to Ritu just about, like, one of the projects I did was in Mumbai, where we had all the oil rigs, and the idea was to make sure that nobody sails into an oil rig. But if you have all these, because they're very nicely positioned in the Gulf, so you can sort of create a maze of all these radars and create a tracking system that increases your safety, security, and shipping efficiency by using what was already there, really digging down to what we have, and not so much focusing on the complexity of the work, which was awesome, but really about what can we do to create value. And I think that was almost 20 years ago when I first started that kind of work, really on project or on product level, and it sort of stuck with me. So it finally gave me some answers, meaning that I have to search now for those answers.
Sounds like you had a couple of light bulb moments that really lit up your enthusiasm for it. So how did that then translate into you deciding to become an author and to put your pen to paper with everything you'd learned?
Yeah, so as you get older and grayer, some of the things in your life sort of come together and start to make sense. And one of the things I've been doing very passionately for a long time was judo and jiu-jitsu. I like the ancient samurai art. And as I found myself in the dojo training, at some point I realized a lot of the things I run into here is very similar to what I run into in my work. Like my opponent typically doesn't tell me what he wants. They try to outmaneuver me. I'm not trying to brute force the situation. There's balance, there's off-balancing of opponents. And the kind of metaphor sort of worked really well when I was explaining things to people in my companies or on conferences. It is really often about keeping, for example, your competition much closer than it seems effective, but what it will give you a certain advantage because you can maneuver faster. It is a kind of a tug of war. It is strategy over brute forcing. So there's lots of things that are very similar. And at some point I thought, well, maybe I should just write about it. And the yellow book that you just shown, I was no longer a yellow belt. I was already a little bit further ahead by then, but it sort of was it still felt like that. Like both in the world of martial arts as in product management, it still felt like you're always learning and trying to figure out what's happening. And basically what I did is I wrote down every product I've ever worked on, or all the funny stories, or all the light bulb moments, as you mentioned, and sort of translated that to, hey, why is this similar to what you would do in a martial art? And that sort of was a nice way of sharing with the world everything I did wrong and right, so people can make new mistakes.
Great. Well, it really works in the book concept. It really gives something novel and easy to understand and interpret, and avoided it being too technical in the jargon, the way that you've linked it to those kind of real life examples. One of our wider team, Dr. Catherine Kennedy, couldn't be on the call today because of time zone. She's in Australia, so but she gave me a question for you. She'd also enjoyed the book very much. But one of the things that was interesting to her was, how do you think we can do that balancing act between agility in the moment and that strategic view for the products? How do you navigate those sometimes contradictory elements?
Yeah, so since the books are all about stories, let's if you turn that into a story, I always have to remember, I'm not so good at dates, 1180 something, probably 80, 85, something like that. There's a famous battle in Japan, the Battle of Don Nuara, and it's sort of the deciding moment in history where they gain their first shogun, so the first CPO, if you want, in our domain, the first who established the political power. And the battle is very interesting. So it's led by Minamoto, and one of the things that he does is he uses the tide of because it's a naval battle, and he's using the tide against their opponent. So at some point the tide flips, and then he has an advantage. But he also has superior coordination over his fleet. So he spent a lot of time on coordinating everything and raising the morale of the team. So why this is the righteous thing to do. And there's also some backstabbing that's happened, but there's more drama involved. But if you were to translate that back to what we can do as leaders to navigate this uncertainty, and I think that's the conclusion of the Black Book, actually the new book, Balance. It ends on a note, or a very simple model that I try to make, saying there's 6 things that you as a leader can do to help your team and your organization, and maybe also yourself or your people on a personal level. And it sort of breaks down into skill and motivation. So those are the 2 axes that you can focus on. You can help people build skill, and you build skill on a personal level. So they're better in what they do. It could be stakeholder management or architecture or talking to customers or coming up with better designs or better ways of interacting with customers. But that's skill. You could also do this on team level. So how do we cooperate together? What kind of artifacts do we use? What kind of processes do we use? I've been in consulting for nearly 10 years. And that has always been one of the first things I started with, making teams organize better. And then on an organizational level, because the teams typically do not operate on their own little ship fighting the enemy. They have to coordinate in a fleet. So the coordination part is super important. And that is the skill part of it. And that's the visible part. But like below the borderline is the motivation part. And that also happens on all these levels. So you have to think about, how do I motivate the organization to actually want this and to sacrifice for this? How do I motivated teams, because they need a different mechanism to be motivated for this. And how do I motivate each individual that is in my team to actually want to achieve this vision?
Mm-hmm.
So along these 6 axes or pillars, I don't think I've really decided on how to label them, but those are 6 elements that you could really focus on to navigate this kind of sea of complexity and hopefully win the battle.
I like that idea of thinking about the business buy-in, the wider business buy-in as a motivation challenge.
Mm.
Yeah, I could see how that would be helpful with identifying ways of communicating that would be persuasive to motivate the wider business. I'm curious about your experience with those type of coordinating structures. Obviously, we have a vested interest in PMOs. It's the space that many of our audience are working in, and learning about and enjoying that kind of continuous learning journey that you've spoken about. I wondered what your experience has been working with PMOs, both at that enterprise level and the organizational coordination roles, and also within product teams, whether you typically would use PMOs or whether some of the functions of what we might see in a project PMO are handled differently in your product teams. So just like you to elaborate on what your experience of PMOs has been and when they've been most effective.
Okay. Yeah, so my background is in product, so my focus is not so much on the project that realizes the product, but obviously we need projects in order to get our products done. That's sort of the mechanism that we use. And if I look at how my typical products were organized, you can sort of put them on a spectrum. You can say this is a product that we're developing and it's super new, it's super complex, and actually we don't know exactly what we're doing. We don't know exactly what we're doing in terms of how we have to build it or what the customer will like. And for those type of projects, you see that agile way of working has become very prevalent because it gives you these shorter cycles to figure out what we're actually doing there. However, when you move closer to production or when you have more physical products or just products that have a lesser degree of uncertainty in there, the more plannable approach does make more sense because you get economies of scale. And a good example of that is I used to work for TomTom. Maybe for the younger audience, we need to explain what a TomTom is. But we used to have these little boxes in a car, and before we had phones, to tell us where we had to go. And these had software components, which we were very innovative with those back in the day, and we innovated a lot of things like seeing multiple routes or moving to a widescreen rather than a portrait kind of mode. We had like predictive algorithms, letting that work. So there was a lot of uncertainty in that. And we noticed that the smaller the team and the faster we do the iterations, that makes sense. However, you also have the whole production line. And I think one of the things that PMO is not highlighting enough is that in this world of complexity, there are elements that are less predictable, where the software way is dominant. That makes sense to approach it more agile. But there's a whole different world to actually getting the product out there in the hands of your customer. And for software, this is often very close to each other. Like we run these SaaS applications and they run around somewhere in the cloud. And there's this that sort of become the staple that we treat all projects with. But that's not how it really works. So like if you build something physical, you need to think about the production line, you need to think about your supply chain, you need to think about the distribution line, you need to think about all kind of regulatory acceptance that you have to do. And for those kind of more or less predictable tasks, I think PMO is an excellent way of planning that.
Yeah, so learning from previous product implementations, so that there is that transference of knowledge both within the company
but
and
it's not
cross
always
industry as well.
yeah, and it's not always sequential. It's a lot more like there's multiple streams. And as a project manager, you should be more influencing. So am I using the right approach for the right part of the product that I'm developing? And again, back to coordination and motivation. Am I making sure that all these things are properly aligned? And you focus far more on the alignment part and the motivation part than actually in depth the work and the details. I think we can trust our people to do the best that they can without micromanaging them on that point.
Yeah, that light coordination, but enabling them to succeed. Yeah. Okay. So one of the things that I think is interesting about the books that you have written has been the breadth of them as well. So you started with this Product Samurai book with the analogy of the martial arts.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've got the Practical Product Management book, which was, as I understand it, more derived from a course that you were delivering.
Yeah, so and I still am a certified Scrum trainer with Scrum.org, and we had the foundational training for product owners, where we teach people not only just the Scrum framework and how to steer the and make use of the framework, but also we dipped a little bit into product management and how business cases work. But it was good starting point, but it was not really there in the breadth and depth that you would need to be. Let's say you probably would need after a couple of years, maybe 2 years or 3 years, you would have questions that there were no answers in the first training. And so within the community, we set out to develop a new course, and many people contributed to that training. So it's really the wisdom of a crowd. But Robin Schuurman and I sort of took an organizational role and also put in a lot of content of ourselves, and we sort of stewarded the content for that particular training. And now it's evolved and it's moving on. But before we handed it back to the community, we sort of wanted to make sure that we had written down everything that we had in our brains and how we intended it as a form of good stewardship. And basically the book is sort of the similar content to the training, but more in depth with more of the models behind it or the alternatives that we considered. And it tries to tell that story from how to evolve yourself as a product manager and just be more effective in your different stances that you can take. For example, you could focus on improving your visionary stance or being more of a customer representative or just focusing on making better decision making. Some things are about being more influential in your organization. But that book is really focused on trying to give you a practical template saying, well, if you're stuck here, this is something you might want to try.
Yeah, drilling into all of these skills. And then you started using the phrase about telling the story. And as I understand it, you've taken a different approach with your latest book, which we haven't yet reviewed on the book review team, but we will hopefully get to that soon. So tell us a bit more about the new book, Balance, is it?
Yeah, it's Balance, and there are some copies in the mail to your subscribers. This is the new one. It's very similar, but it's now in black. Maybe also reflecting that I've become a black belt somewhere along this journey. And the interesting part is that in Europe, we always look at all the belts and see how we progress. We're very focused on focusing and measuring and steps. And in Japan, they say, well, you're either down or you're not down. So you passed your black belt or not. And the idea behind it was actually, hey, because you trained so much, the color of your belt has changed, which means I can do probably more dangerous stuff with you. And that's sort of also the metaphor that I wanted to bring to the product management community, saying, look, at some point you progress in your career and you start working more on a leadership position. And it would be good to take a different stance. And this book is really book targeting product leaders to talk about how you can organize your organization and your people and your teams and how to motivate them. But since these people never have time, and they are always super busy and they don't have time to read, and they're probably like me, that about 20% of the books in my bookshelf have not been opened. But they looked interesting, so I bought them, and I wanted to avoid that. And Practical Product Management is over 400 pages, so I presume that not everybody has read it cover to cover. And I wanted to make sure people would actually read this. So the book is much shorter, but it's also a novel style. So it's a story, and it's a story about a man who joins a company, and he's trying to create this product, but he runs into all kinds of problems with his team, with the organization, with the vision, with the market. And at the same time, the story is not about that, because it's all about his daughter, who is joining the championship team of her judo class. And now she has to figure out how to become a champion. And it's about discipline, and it's about knowing what you're really good at or what you want to achieve, about motivating other people in your team to collaborate and help you train. Because if you pass an exam, there's the kata that you have to show. And the beauty of the kata is that you need somebody else. And you need what we in Japanese, we call it uke. And uke literally means the one that receives. So you need somebody that is willing to accept you at this point and make you shine, basically. And I thought that was a really cool metaphor to pull through the book. Your job as a leader is no longer to be the champion, but it's to make the other people the champions.
Wonderful. I'm really looking forward to reading it, and I love the fact that you've taken the storytelling approach with business content, because there is so much human drama as well in what we do, isn't there? So it's fantastic. Thank you.
I hope you like it.
Yeah. Ritu, did you have any questions for Chris?
Yes, Chris, I'll take a moment to discuss AI PMO book reviews. Was there anything in your book reviews that you hadn't thought about earlier, or anything that you found particularly insightful?
I think the biggest insight was actually the community. Because when I was writing my first book, I was really targeting product owners. I was like, product owners, and they should be more product managers, and was trying to make them better. And then the second book was also more or less targeting product ownership in the context of Scrum. And I think the biggest surprise is like, that we have this whole world of PMO out there and people that do similar jobs. And much like the uke, we need each other to get to a certain product that ends up in the hands of our customers. And I don't think I ever specifically targeted or marketed or interviewed this whole audience of people that would be would potentially benefit from these techniques. And at the same time, I realized that's something I developed over time, and not just your reviews, but also the other reviews sort of made me understand that the things that we struggle with are human things. It's our things of where we in the business struggle. And many of the things that I describe, especially in the Balance book, are not unique to product management. They would be similar to somebody who runs operations. It would be similar to somebody in sales. It is everywhere when we have this complexity where we try to navigate our daily life and try to build something of value. And whether that is coding, or it is architecting it, or producting it, or marketing it, or selling it, or just running the project around it, it is really about how do I become a valuable member of my team, and how do I make other people grow? So there's a more universal aspect to it. And I think that's something I definitely picked up from your reviews.
Good to hear that.
And thanks, Chris. I think that struck me as well when I was reading the first book, just that it would be useful for operational leaders, for business executives, for anyone who wants to really better themselves in how they're serving their customers, and that focus on continuous learning and staying on the journey. But we had another question from Dr. Catherine about what mindset shifts you think are required to navigate these complexities within organizations. Where do you think that we should be focusing our energies?
That's a lot of questions. So mind shift change. So the book is broken down into 3 main chapters, and I know this because I made a small summary for myself before they went into the interview, because I sort of also forgot. But there was an idea behind it, and the idea was the first section or chapter is really about escaping the chaos or accepting the chaos. And in our minds, we are structured animals, so we want to classify everything and structure everything. And I think the biggest mindset shift is accepting that there is always inherent chaos. Much like when I do a judo match and I'm sparring with somebody, my opponent typically doesn't follow my beautiful setup trap or my beautiful setup strategy. They always do something else. And in the beginning, I was really frustrated with that. And I tried to add more explicit around it. And at some point, I just have to accept, oh, this is what we're doing. Okay, then let's see how things evolve. So the first chapter is about accepting that there's chaos, and every chapter is built up in 5 subsegments or subchapters. And the first one is really about, okay, accept that there is chaos, then find what drives you. What is your core driver? And it has nothing to do with money or status or in your organization. So my personal passion is about teaching other people. And regardless in what other organization I'm in, or even in my private life, I love to teach. And the joy is not so much about being right or being able to give all this knowledge. The joy is in seeing somebody else grow. See a light bulb go off with somebody else. And sometimes they invent something else that's beautiful. We've put them on a path and they grow and they do something else. So that's my personal motivation. And I think once you know your personal motivation, then navigating that chaos becomes easier. Now, then you can think about what kind of discipline do I need to bring in there? Because the only reason why I wouldn't say I'm good in martial art, but why I am where I am is because of my discipline and going and training and keep doing the training. And I think that's also something that's true in our business. If you have this passion that you a reason that you want to follow and grow, then you have to be prepared to also put the discipline behind it. And that boils sort of down to what kind of values do you have, and there's it closes off with vision, consequence, and decision. And I think that's the core of the question is about, if you make a decision, there's always a kind of vision behind it, a reason why you did this, and you better communicate that. And every decision also has consequences. And as soon as you know what the right decisions are, you can start talking about, okay, but this is what we want to achieve. Then this is what I chose to do. And I accept that this also has some consequences.
Yeah, we can't do everything, and the fact of making a decision is choosing one path over another, isn't it? So
exactly.
Yeah. But
I think that's the
I like
biggest
that
mind
idea
shift.
of accepting the chaos, that the world is complex, and to navigate it, we have to create our own direction and base that on how we can best fulfill our own purpose. Yeah.
So and actually, this is a true story. Like the book is also picking up on true stories partially, and there's a narrative in the book that talks about. I'm not sure if I can recall it exactly, but the sensei of the dojo is talking about somebody else who is there as well. And he says, "Well, this is a wonderful woman, and she because of what she does and what she stands for, and that's because she inspires children to do the things differently, to believe in themselves, and to go to sleep with big dreams and then wake up invigorated." And he's like, "Well, that sounds super interesting. So what does he do?" I said, "Well, she writes children's book." And often we describe what we do, but we don't describe why we do it. And once you start moving to what is my purpose, then the other things become more easier.
Okay. Oh, it's been fascinating speaking with you, Chris, and I'm really looking forward to reading the next the Balance book. And so thank you very much for your time. Just before we close, is there anything that you would like to share with the AIPMO community and anyone else who's watching in terms of what else is coming up for you? Anything that you're excited about that you want others to know about?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I think the question that's on everybody's mind now is what are we going to do with AI? And then how's that going to automate my work? And am I still safe? And what should I do with that? And I think the core is I'm not too worried about it because I know what my personal passion is and I know what I want to bring to the world. And from there, I will find ways to do it. And I will find tools somewhere along the way to achieve that. And I think that's something that people in product management, project management, and PMO should be very much aware of. If you know what your passion is, then there's just better tools out there. And if you don't know what your passion is and you're mechanically going through the motions, it's just like with a judo match. I don't give you much chance to win if you don't know where your heart is.
Okay, so we'll take that as a challenge, I think, to
And you also do start doing
some...
judo, of course.
Yeah, I think it would do us all good, wouldn't it? But well, thank you so much, Chris, and all the best then with the ongoing promotion for a Balance book. And thank you so much for what you've shared with us. And
Our pleasure.
look forward to speaking with you another time.
All right.
Thank you, Chris.